So the strategy, it worked for some time, but I do believe that it's not sustainable in the sense that it's not addressing the root causes of the issue.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. Cabo Delgado is Mozambique's northernmost province on the border with Tanzania. It has been gripped by a violent insurgency since 2017 when Islamist militants began attacking villages, towns, and government forces. The region also has major natural gas deposits in which the French energy giant Total has made some big investments. But after attacks in 2021, Total suspended operations. While foreign troops, including forces from Rwanda and the Southern African Development Community, have helped the Mozambican government regain some territory, sporadic attacks continue, and the humanitarian crisis remains acute. In recent weeks, there has been a sharp uptick in these attacks, leading to the displacement of about 60,000 people. Joining me to discuss the ongoing crisis in Cabo Delgado, the role of mineral extraction in this conflict, and what the Mozambican government and the international community can do to reduce violence in this region is Romao Xavier, Oxfam in Southern Africa's country representative for Mozambique. We kick off discussing this latest explosion of violence before having a longer conversation about what is driving this conflict and what can be done to bring it under control. This episode is really core to a key mission of Global Dispatches, which is to shine a spotlight on undercovered global humanitarian crises that most media outlets tend to overlook. If you want to help me in that mission, please become a paying subscriber to Global Dispatches, and you can do so following the link in the show notes of this episode or going to globaldispatches.org. And when you become a paying subscriber, you get a whole lot of bonus material, including full access to my podcast about the UN, To Save Us From Hell. And as we're gearing up for UNGA, you'll also get my personal UNGA preview that's forthcoming. Again, please go to globaldispatches.org and get a paid subscription. Thank you. Now here is my conversation with Romao Xavier of Oxfam. Romao, thank you so much for speaking with me today. Over the last few weeks, some 60,000 people have been displaced in Cabo Delgado. What do we know about these attacks that have caused this displacement?
Well, by today, a lot is known. However, there's not a single narrative to it. There are some narratives that say the attacks are coming from a jihadist group, which is a member of a bigger network in Eastern Southern Africa. Some people, they say this is an ICE extension. And some people say no, unknown people that are connected to some elites in a country trying to control the resources in the northern province of Cabo Delgado. And others, they link that to the boom of extractives, the gas projects, but also mining. We know there's graphite, there's rubies around. So there's some narrative saying the attacks are related to that. But the truth of the matter is that they are non-government armed groups, well organized, with some command, that first they were just attacking government infrastructures and institutions, but they evolved in such a way that they start attacking people, citizens in their homes, abducting people, killing people, beheading people. So that is the trend.
So there's really no certainty around who is behind these recent attacks, you're saying?
Yeah, behind this recent attack, there's no a single narrative.
Who's being displaced then? Who are the 60,000 people that have had to flee their homes?
People in the communities, in the districts, in the locations that are being attacked, and some they flee because they fear to be the next target. It was more directed to government institutions, but now all the attacks are either for government institutions or for people's homes in their locations.
Well, maybe we can take a step back a little bit. I mean, you're saying we don't know who is precisely behind this particular series of attacks that have caused this new displacement crisis, but it does kind of fit into a longer history, recent history of violence in the Cabo Delgado region of Mozambique. Can you just give us a bit of a background on this conflict and how it began and how it's evolved?
As a background, back in 2015 and 16, thereabout, a movement of people in that province started to be seen. And many people were really looking at those movements and trying to make sense why, where they're coming from, and what is their objective. And from there, many voices from civil society and many actors in that province started to ask the government why we are seeing these movements here and there. But the government was saying, oh, no, this is not to worry about. And some analysts started to link the fact that the northern province of Cabo Delgado were so isolated and all the previous development endeavors, they were taking the province lightly without addressing some of the key causes of poverty and exclusion in that province. But as the time went by, in 2017, the very first attack happened in a city of district called Mocimboa da Praia. Mocimboa da Praia is one of the northmost district in the province that borders with Tanzania. And it's a district that is attached to neighboring district of Palma, where the exploration of gas was just starting.
So there are these attacks that began around the same time that major international companies were starting to look for natural gas reserves and deposits nearby.
That is right. And the very first attack, as I said, was in that town of Mocimboa da Praia in October 2017. And from there, the attack continued, not so frequent, but continued to happen, directed to government institutions, buildings, settings where the government was doing something. And 2 years later, the conflict went beyond Mocimboa da Praia. We started to see some attacks in neighboring districts of that Mocimboa da Praia until such a time that the attacks started to happen even beyond government institutions until in 2021 we had one of the most deadly attack to the Palma district. And Palma district is where the exploration of gas from Total is housed.
And Total, of course, is the French energy giant. So who was behind these attacks over the years you just described?
Today, the mainstream narrative is that is a group of extremist violent movements linked to one Al Shabaab. Al Shabaab is a bigger group in East Africa, But some they say it's not only Al Shabaab, it's also linked to the wider movement of the Islamic State. But nobody is really pointing out the finger to the right direction. Last year, the government killed some key figures they deemed to be the leaders of this movement. And at that time, they were believing that a few months after, they could finish all this movement. But what we have seen is that the movement, instead of dying off, it's really spreading out.
Hmm.
It's going out of these two, three districts in the northern province towards the central district and southern districts of the same province. So as we speak, you have 1 or 2 weeks of calm moments, then you have outbreak of attacks that are not only localized, are really spread around. And what is seen today is that those groups now they act as a small groups, moving swiftly in such a way that it's not easy to say this district is safe enough today and will be safe enough tomorrow, because you
Hmm.
don't know what will happen. They move so quickly. And in the last 2, 3 weeks, we have a peak of attacks in places where we never thought attack will be. That's why the displacement of many more people that we have seen in these 3 or 4 weeks back.
So, I mean, it would seem that this conflict is spreading. You mentioned earlier, though, that the incidence of these attacks has largely corresponded with the discovery of major natural gas reserves in the region. Can you just describe for me the relationship as you see it between the discovery of these natural gas reserves and the investment of that major French company, Total, and the outbreak of violence?
The mainstream discourse is not really tying the two things together. However, the reality shows that when the investment decisions were taken, it's where we saw the emergence of violent attacks. The first attack in 2017 just came after the first decision of investment was announced. And because of that, we had the company declaring force majeure. And you could see that most of the attacks were directed to places close to the exploration of the resources. So if you make those correlations, then you can really see that might have some kind of relationship. Yeah, the fact that these exploration, these companies are coming, and I would add that the feeling of surrounding communities to those resources is that they have not been benefiting from what is happening. In fact, they see themselves being excluded in all processes. And on top of that, the process of resettlement, they have moved them from their original places where they had their livelihoods to new places where they have to start learning new ways of living. And sometimes places where the weather, the climate, and the key livelihood sources are well different from where they're coming from.
Hmm.
So those things, they can tell you how the local communities are feeling around the investment that are there. It's not a linear correlation, but if you look at the thing, you can sense that some kind of correlation has to be.
Yeah, I mean, there's some level of disgruntlement, as you described it, I would imagine, by the local population who have been displaced by the, activities of this big international company and potentially also the government. So that would seem to make sense. I'm curious, though, to learn what has been the response of the government to this escalating attack over the last several years in Cabo Delgado, and also most recently, what's been the response just over the last few weeks to this latest series of attacks that's caused such displacement?
One line of response from the government was more a military kind of response. If you look back, you will see that the government started to reorganize itself to defend the positions that were being attacked and try to expel those people out of the country, of the province. But when the government realized that this was a massive task and they could not do themselves alone, they then started to bring in different partners and supporters. One of these partners was the standby force from the SADC region. It came to Mozambique for, I think, 2 or 2 years and a half.
And SADC is the Southern African regional group.
Yeah, it's the Southern Africa region standby force. Then they also brought in Rwanda, and Rwanda still around. The Rwandan government sent a massive contingent of military people, and they are still in Cabo Delgado working side by side with the government forces to try to combat those insurgents.
It doesn't seem like that strategy is necessarily working, though, if we're seeing such an uptick recently in displacement and attacks.
At the beginning, it was like, it's working because they weakened the movement for some, months. But then after they put the movement to a minimal presence, and we saw now a spike again of violence and the reach of this group that goes beyond the few districts in northern part of the province to the southern part, but also even to neighboring provinces. Yeah, once or twice they went to Niassa, which is neighboring province in the west part of the Cabo Delgado, and in the southern part of Cabo Delgado, there's a province called Nampula, and we got attacks in those provinces. And those are provinces that are receiving many, many internally displaced people that are running away from the conflict. So the strategy, it worked for some time, but I do believe that it's not sustainable in the sense that it's not addressing the root causes of the issue. I think a combination of military operations and other interventions that try to address the root causes of the issue might yield better results.
So, what would you say then are the root causes that ought to be resolved?
Well, if you look at the research that's out there from many sources, one of the root causes is discontent from the people living in those areas of the fact that they have not been well included in the development trajectory of the country. But also in the last few years, 5, 6 years, they have seen the boom of natural resources exploration is not supporting. In the contrary, they are exacerbating their exclusion and their poverty. That is one of the root causes. But there are many other root causes. Some reports are also talking about religious exclusion of some groups. And if you look at Cabo Delgado has a history of ethnic separation that was promoted even in the colonial era, where a group of ethnic elite was close to the colonial elites and they had benefits, and the other ethnic groups were really excluded. Those are the groups that joined the liberation movement, and they were in the front line of the fight against colonialism. However, when the independence came, those groups that were fighting, they had some privileges against the groups that were privileged with the colonial era. And because of that, those former elite groups in the colonial era, they saw an exclusion of their group in the new development. And that also exacerbated a kind of ethnical hatred and a religious hatred, because the group that was in the elite at the time of colonial, they are mostly Muslim, whereas the group that went into struggle, liberation struggle, are not Muslim. The majority are Catholic or Christians, but some are not even religious.
And it was interesting, Pope Leo just earlier this month issued a statement on the situation in Cabo Delgado, which, is rare because it doesn't really get a whole lot of international attention, but it was interesting to see his direct intervention in the situation.
And there is a reason for that. The Catholic Church has been very vocal since ever. Even the representative of Pope Francis was expelled from Mozambique. He has to leave because of their positioning towards the conflict. He was so vocal. And even with him being expelled, his replacement still in the same line. They try to call the government to speak what they see as a truth, and they always speak about that. If you follow the issue, in the last 2 to 4 years, access to information is restricted in that province. Journalists are hardly allowed to go in those things. So most of the information that people have come either from missionaries, the church, and other people that have a way to get into those places. But formal journalists were not allowed. Today is a slightly better, but it wasn't like that in the last 4 or 5 years. You could not see any journalist going there. If a national journalist was there, at the end of the mission, they would take his machines, be a camera, be whatever registration that that journalist got. So the situation for information was very bad. And in those instances, the Catholic Church was one of the sources of information. That's why the Pope knows what is happening, and he might be issuing his statement based on that information.
And the Pope's intervention here kind of leads me, I think, to my last question, which is, as you described it earlier, this is a conflict that is getting worse, that does have some relation to the international exploitation of natural resources in Mozambique. What role might other key international players have in reducing this spiral of conflict and preventing this conflict from getting worse?
Well, I think the international community should not close eyes to this conflict, should really open eyes, and by opening eyes, see what is happening, and they use their power to communicate more about the situation, to use their power to change the situation. I would say, for example, the United Nations has a role to play. I think the situation in Cabo Delgado should go to that level. I know there's some conflicts now that they are so massive. If you go to Gaza and other conflicts, they get a lot more attention. But it's a time for the United Nations to change the way they see the conflict in Cabo Delgado. It's a protected crisis because, if you see 2017 to today, it's 8 years in a row. And if the attention was given in the right time and with the right amount, we might not evolve to this situation. So I think United Nations first, then the big players, United States, European Union, African Union, and other multilateral organizations need to really bring this issue to the public domain and try to use their power to contribute to stop this. First, to understand and stop this. I don't believe that only providing military kind of intervention is the right solution. Of course, where there's attack, we need military intervention, but we need more than military intervention. I think, for example, the support that the European Union provided was at times support, but was not enough. They have never went beyond training some part of the government forces. They did not intervene in some of the key needs of the defense forces in Mozambique. The quality of the defense force, training them not only in using weapons, but also in addressing people's need on the ground so that they provide a human kind of intervention. The issue of Total having security that surround their compound. And that security, I can tell you, it's very, very strong. You have three kind of forces just protecting that investment in the district of Palma. And that is really massive defense. But you can't find that beyond Palma to protect the people on the ground. So that also sends a message that the exploration of resources is more important than the rest of the province. And that is not a good way of addressing the issue.
Romao, thank you so much for your time. I'm glad we're able to draw some attention to this crisis.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.